Hello, and welcome back to Daddy Rolled a One. I'm Martin, and today I'm going to be talking about two different books in Goodman Games' alphabet series. This is the Dungeon alphabet, which you see here, and we'll also be talking about the Cthulhu alphabet. These are reference books that are very useful, full of tables for a games master to prep for a session, or even at the table during a game when something unexpected happens and you might not have prepped for something that your players did. Maybe they surprised you with something. These books are going to be full of things that you can use right at the table to help keep the game moving. Before we get started, I would like to ask that if you do enjoy this video, to please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Also to please share the video on your social media networks. That is the quickest and fastest way for me to grow my audience and to grow this channel. And then lastly, please jump into the comments. Let me know what you liked or didn't like about this video. Maybe ask a question about these books or share your thoughts on using them, some experiences that you've had. And then lastly, let me know what other kind of content you'd like to see me cover in the future. So we can just jump right into this. This is the Dungeon alphabet. As you can see, it says it's an A to Z reference for classic dungeon design. This is the expanded 4th edition of the book, and it is published by Goodman Games. Most people know Goodman Games for publishing Dungeon Crawl Classics, also called DCC. This is an old school flavored fantasy adventure game, and I know a lot of people, especially 5e players, during the recent OGL kerfuffle were looking for alternatives to D&D, and I saw a lot of people on social media recommending Dungeon Crawl Classics. And I even saw Bob Worldbuilder on his YouTube channel recently talking about how much he likes DCC and reviewing the game. So if you're familiar with that, you know what you're kind of getting into with the style and the quality of this particular book. Goodman Games is also known for publishing a series of books called Original Adventures Reincarnated, where they take old adventures from the 70s and 80s that were published by TSR, which is the company that made Dungeons & Dragons before Wizards of the Coast. And they include, it's like a historical document that includes all of the different versions of those adventures that were printed over the years, because there were different printings. Sometimes they had different art or even different content. And then they also have a section where they update it to 5e rules. They have essays and things like that. So they're really well known for trying to preserve that sort of old school feel. And people who are familiar with older versions of D&D will note right off the bat, the book is written by Michael Curtis, but the foreword is by David Zeb Cook, who was one of the two authors of the 1981 Expert Rules for Dungeons & Dragons that followed on the Moldvay Basic Rules. And also he wrote the first advanced Dungeons & Dragons edition book of Oriental Adventures. And probably most people know him, or he's most famous for also writing the entire rule system for 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. He has a lot of other writing credits to his name, a lot of adventures, Star Frontiers, other games like that, but he most notably is his 2nd edition work for Dungeons & Dragons. Also, old school people will note the artists on here by people like Errol Otis, Jeff Easley, Jim Holloway, Jim Rosla. Those are all old school artists that TSR hired back in, again, the 70s and 80s. And it's really nice to see their work in here. Some of these people actually have already passed on, unfortunately, so it's nice to see their work being preserved in a book like this. So this is a hardback book. It's full color covers, but the interior is all black and white. And you can see it's got these sort of end papers. So it's the same art. And just jumping in, we can get a look at this nice artwork here. This is going to tell you pretty much everything you need to know about what's in this book. So it is an A to Z guide. So these are tables for every letter of the alphabet. Sometimes they have multiples. So altars, adventures, books, battles, caves, crypts, doors, dragons, echoes, entrances, fungi, gold, guardians, hallways, hazards, inscriptions, jewels, kobolds, levels, magic, maps, no stone left unturned. That's kind of I think a bit of a cheat, but okay. Oozes, omens, pools, potions, questions, quests, rooms, relics, statues, stairs, traps, treasure chests, undead, underwater vermin, vegetation, weird, xenophobia, yellow, and zowie. Again, a couple of those maybe stretch it a little bit, but they're all really fun. And what you see, so right after you have your foreword by Dave Cook, which I told you about, there's an introduction. It talks about using the supplement and mentions right down here at the bottom, no one knows your preferred gaming system, your player levels, the power levels of their characters, or what your gaming group likes more than you, the referee. So the point of this book is that it is really system neutral. It's any fantasy adventure game. You could pick this up and use this. So you saw, I mentioned you could use it with D&D. You could definitely use this with Dungeon Crawl Classics. But one of my other videos that I talked about most recently was using the Savage Worlds game system to play Pathfinder. You could use this with that because there's really no rules in here. There's no mechanics. It's more based on ideas and inspirations. So you can use this with any fantasy adventure game. You see here some great old school art, again, by Errol Otis. Very, very famous artist in the old school community. And it just jumps right in. So your first table is for altars, and it gives you an idea. You have a D20 roll down here. You roll once for the appearance, and there's a bunch of different descriptions here. Then you can roll D3 times for the accoutrement to your altar. And then lastly, special properties, 10% cumulative chance per dungeon level. So in old school games, the idea, very much like a video game, which is where video games got it from because the tabletop versions came first. The farther down you went, the higher the level of the dungeon, the deeper that you go, the more difficult it gets. So it makes sense. So this idea is that, you have a 10% cumulative chance for a special property on your altar per level. So you could use this. Again, you're playing a game, your characters go left when you thought that they were going to go right. You're trying to come up with stuff on the fly of like what happened. Maybe they enter a room and you say, hey, there's an altar there. And they decide that they want to investigate that altar. What does it look like? What's it made of? Can we, see what we can do with this altar? Well, you could roll this right at the table. Alternatively, what you could do is prep it ahead of time. Maybe you have everything planned out. So no matter which way they go, you've got something ready. You could roll up your altar, or you could pick, of course, look at these ideas and be inspired by them to put an altar there that you want them to find based on some fun ideas that you see here. And that's really how you could use this. So here's a bunch of different adventuring groups. So this is a dozen unusual adventuring bands, and it just goes through like different adventurers that you might find in a dungeon. Some more great art. This is a fold out page, which I really like, although it is a little difficult to fold back, but we'll make it work. There's an ad there, but okay, so B is for books. I can tell you I've used this in a game that I run for my daughter. So I use the 1981 basic expert rules for her game. And they went into a library once and were looking at books, and I was like, oh shoot, like I wish that I had planned ahead of time and made a list of books that could be in there. Had I had more time to prep, I would have done that. However, I had this book. I bring this book with me to every session. So I had this with me, and I quickly just zipped through this and through some of these titles and different descriptions and things out of these books, which was very, very helpful. So these were special properties of books, but these were the book titles that I used over here. So some of these entries have multiple different tables. This book title table is just super helpful. Even if you don't use them as is, you can see this and then be inspired by it to create your own that fit your style of game and the sort of, aesthetic that you have for your world. So I'm not going to flip through every page here, but you can see just some really fun things. There's different doors. There's dragon types. There's a nice ribbon in here, so you can mark your page. E is for echoes. I think that's a really fun one. Entrances. Again, you can see some of this old school art that's been included in here. Oozes, levels, jewels. I particularly liked, there's underwater and undead, which are great. This is a fun trap photo. This is T is for traps, and you see this great piece of art here with this guy that reached for this coin and was impaled by all these different spikes. One of my favorite tables in here is the weird. People, again, who know me online know I'm kind of known for talking about weird stuff in fantasy role-playing games. So there's whole tables for that. I use this quite a bit. And then yellow, which was kind of a surprise. I was like, what are we doing with yellow here? But it just talks about how it's kind of a sickening color. It can be, if it can be a happy color, of course, but the way that they do it in here, it makes it a little bit more creepy. And so then they have 6 sinister uses for the color yellow. So then that's it. that is Dungeon Alphabet. And then really quickly, let's look at the Cthulhu Alphabet. So again, this is a hardback book. Now this one doesn't have the paper cover. It just comes like this. I actually think this one is a little bit nicer. It's got this like kind of matte finish, but again, it's got this old school art. This has definitely got to be by Errol Otis right here. It just looks like his style. So this is what's fun about this is it was kind of, I think, intended for DCC, but it also could be used for if you play Call of Cthulhu, but it could be used in a fantasy game as well, like a D&D, which is what I use it for. I use it, again, for the game that I run for my daughter. You can see it's got, again, I talked about Errol Otis doing some art in here. This is by Michael Curtis, same guy who wrote the Dungeon Alphabet. And in here we've got Angles, Books, Cultists, Deep Ones, Elder Thing, Forbidden, Great Race, Hastur, Ithaca, Journal, Kingsport, Legacy, Madness, Miskatonic University, Nyarlathotep, Outer Guards, Narcotic, Quiescent, Red Hook, Serpent Folk, Shoggoth, Tentacles, Abosathia, Unnameable, Vorish Sign, Worshippers, Xenophobia, Yellow Sign, Yog-Sothoth, and Zombies. So apologies for some of my mispronunciations on these, but you can see these aren't always normal words that we would use because they come from the Cthulhu mythos. But a fun thing on this, the introduction is by Sandy Peterson. Old schoolers will recognize that name. That is the person who created and wrote the original Call of Cthulhu game that came out, I believe it was 1980 was the first edition, and is one of the principals behind Chaosium, which is the company that still publishes Call of Cthulhu to this day. So again, you jump right in with all these different ideas of things that you can roll. Again, this is intended that you could use this with a fantasy game, but you could use it in a pulp adventure game. So there are some things in here that reference modern day 1930s, 1940s types of things going on in the environment. But a lot of this is really intended to be things that you could include in a fantasy game. So we'll just, flip through a few of these pages. Again, I bring this with me to every game that I run for my daughter's group. She and her friends are around 13 right now. And so there's a lot of really good, cool, creepy stuff in here. You can see this is one of the more modern things. But, I've actually used some of these, even though this is modern. And I just change it up to, remove the modern things, and it still inspires me. But I bring this to every game that I run for her, and I can use it right during the game. Sometimes they'll take a bathroom break, and I was like, oh shoot, I didn't prepare for them to do this, and I'll pull this book out, and I just quickly flip to something where I want it to be a little creepy, a little, keep them on their toes and not just do all the standard kind of stuff. And this book is perfect for that, for including things that you wouldn't normally think of, get you out of your comfort zone. This is the thing on the Vorish sign, which I think was really weird, really cool actually. A bunch of different signs of power that you can use and how to make them and what they do. Yellow sign, and then you've got, I believe it was Zombies and Yog-Sothoth at the end here. So that is the Dungeon Alphabet and the Cthulhu Alphabet. So both of these are available from Cthulhu Games. They have one more book in their alphabet series, which I do not have yet. It's called the Monster Alphabet. If I do get it, I will do a video on that in the future. But these can be used, as I mentioned, in any kind of fantasy game. Particularly, I use them in kind of old school D&D, but they can be used in anything. And I will be covering more old school games in the future, so you can look in the video list. I'll put it at the end here, where I'm going to start collating all of my old school or OSR type reviews so that you can see them all together. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.